When someone passes judgment on you, it's tempting to take it as an objective assessment, as if they've looked into the core of your being and weighed your value on some universal scale. But the reality is far less flattering to them and far more liberating for you. Judgment almost always says more about the one doing the judging than it does about the person being judged. It's a mirror disguised as a verdict. When people criticize, they reveal their own worldview, their biases, their wounds, their frustrations, and yes, sometimes their jealousy. In this way, judgment is rarely pure observation. It's an expression of the internal landscape of the judge. Think about it. The same action, the same statement, the same life choice can draw praise from one person and condemnation from another. If judgment were objective, this wouldn't be possible. But people don't operate like impartial machines. They filter everything through their personal history, moral framework, and emotional state. If they've been taught to view risk as recklessness, they'll see your courage as foolishness. If they've been conditioned to equate conformity with goodness, they'll view your individuality as rebellion. And if they've been trained to mask their own insecurity with criticism, they'll treat your success as a personal threat. This is why understanding the nature of judgment is essential. It shifts the power dynamic. You stop playing defense against every opinion thrown your way. You stop wasting energy trying to convince everyone to see you correctly. Because there is no universal correct in their eyes, only the version their own mind constructs. You start to realize that when someone labels you, they're not stamping an eternal truth onto your forehead. They're telling you more about the labels they carry inside themselves. But this isn't a call to dismiss all criticism out of hand. The wise person knows that sometimes judgment does contain a seed of truth, something you can use to grow. Key is discernment. Ask yourself, is this observation grounded in reality, or is it merely the echo of someone else's fears? Is it based on knowledge of me or on assumptions about me? If the judgment comes from someone who's walked alongside you, seen your process, and offered the criticism in the spirit of helping you improve, then it's worth considering. But if it's delivered from the cheap seats with no understanding of your journey, then it's little more than noise. And here's something to remember: the ones who judge harshly are often the ones who feel most judged themselves. A person secure in their own skin doesn't need to constantly tear others down. They have no reason to. Criticism becomes their shield, their way of projecting discomfort outward so they don't have to face it inward. If you can recognize this dynamic, you stop taking their words personally. You see them for what they are, symptoms of an unresolved internal struggle, and that gives you the freedom to step out of the emotional quicksand they're trying to drag you into. Now this understanding isn't just about protecting your self-esteem. It's also about clarity, because the more you internalize that judgment is a reflection of the judge, the more you can free yourself from the endless loop of performing for approval. You begin to live according to your own convictions, not according to the applause or scorn of the crowd. This is what gives life integrity. It's when your values and your actions are aligned, regardless of who's nodding in agreement or shaking their head in disapproval. But there's another side to this coin. If you're going to reject the false judgments of others, you have to be willing to examine your own tendencies to judge. It's easy to see the bias in someone else's criticism. It's harder to admit the bias in our own. The same principle applies. Your judgment of others often reveals what you value, what you fear, and what you've yet to understand. If you want to live free from shallow judgments, you have to stop dealing them out so cheaply yourself. Because here's the truth. If you spend your life constantly judging others, you'll never escape the fear of being judged yourself. you'll carry that anxiety like a weight on your back. But if you live in a way that's grounded in principle, self-awareness, and humility, you'll realize you don't have to control how others see you. You only have to control how you live, so when someone decides they have the authority to define you, pause. Instead of rushing to defend yourself, ask a better question. What does this judgment say about them? What belief system is it exposing? What insecurity might be behind it? In doing so, you detach your identity from their perception, and in that detachment lies a profound kind of freedom. The point is not to become indifferent, as if the opinions of others never matter. The point is to put them in their proper place. Let the opinions that help you grow in, keep the ones that are just noise at a healthy distance. The more you do this, the more you'll realize that your worth was never up for public vote to begin with. And here's where we land. The next time someone rushes to judge you, don't simply ask, why are they saying this? Ask, what is this revealing about them? Because once you understand that judgment is a mirror, not a verdict, you'll stop living like you're on trial in the court of public opinion and start living like you're the author of your own life. It's where real power begins. One of the most dangerous mistakes we can make in life, is to assume that our perspective is the complete picture. We tend to look at others through the lens of our own experiences, values, and expectations, and then decide, often without realizing it, that our view is the final word on who they are. But life isn't that simple, and people aren't that easy to define. Every human being is a vast, intricate story, most of which you'll never see. And the fragments you do see are filtered through your own interpretation, which is far from objective. It's easy to believe that because you've observed a few actions, heard a few words, or noticed certain patterns, you've arrived at the truth about someone. But you have to remember, you're not just observing reality, you're interpreting it. Your interpretation is shaped by your own history, biases, and even your mood in that moment. Two people can witness the exact same event and walk away with entirely different conclusions about it. That's not because one is necessarily lying or blind, it's because human perception is inherently selective and subjective. This means that every time you pass judgment on someone, you're not only judging them, you're also revealing something about yourself, your priorities, your assumptions, your blind spots. You might think you're delivering an objective verdict, but more often than not, you're looking into a mirror without realizing it. And that mirror is fogged by your own limitations. Think about the people you've misjudged in the past. Maybe you thought someone was arrogant, only to later realize they were just shy. Maybe you assumed someone was lazy, and later discovered they were quietly battling a health condition or carrying emotional burdens you couldn't see. Each of those moments should remind us that our understanding is partial, and partial understanding is a poor foundation for absolute judgment. But here's the challenge. Our brains like certainty. They like to categorize people quickly, to file them neatly into boxes labeled good, bad, trustworthy, unreliable, friend, enemy. It feels efficient, it gives us a sense of control, yet this very impulse is what blinds us to the deeper truths about others. When we lock someone into a category too quickly, we stop being curious about who they really are. We replace openness with assumption, and that assumption becomes a filter that distorts everything we see afterward. And this is where humility becomes essential. Humility isn't pretending you know nothing. It's recognizing the limits of what you know and being open to the fact that your perception might be incomplete or even wrong. This doesn't mean you suspend all discernment. You still have to make judgments in the sense of making decisions, setting boundaries, and evaluating trust. But there's a difference between making informed decisions based on evidence and declaring that you have the full truth about a person's worth or character. There's also an ethical dimension here. When you judge someone without full, you're not just risking error, you're potentially shaping the way others see that person too. Words have ripple effects. A careless judgment spoken with conviction can stick to someone's reputation for years, sometimes a lifetime. This is why the old wisdom of slow to speak is still relevant. You might think you're sharing an observation, but you could be planting a seed of bias in someone else's mind that will grow into prejudice. On the flip side, imagine if we applied the same standards to ourselves that we often apply to others. How would you feel if someone decided your entire identity based on your worst day? Or if they reduced you to a single mistake without ever seeing the context, the growth or the parts of you that contradict that moment? Most of us would call that unfair. And yet, that's exactly what we sometimes do to others without a second thought. Now there's a deeper reason why this matters, not just for fairness, but for our own growth. When you learn to withhold premature judgment, you keep yourself in a position to learn. You open the door to seeing the complexity of human nature, and that makes you wiser. Every time you resist the temptation to define someone too quickly, you're training your mind to stay flexible and your heart to stay compassionate. And that's a discipline worth cultivating because it not only changes the way you treat others, it changes who you become in the process. So the next time you feel that urge to label someone, pause. Ask yourself, what do I actually know? What am I assuming? Could there be more to this story than I see right now? And if the answer is yes, which it almost always is, then leave space for that possibility. The truth is there's a kind of strength in withholding judgment until you have earned the right to make it. That strength comes from patience, curiosity, and respect for the unseen parts of a person's life. Because here, the bottom line, your perspective is valuable, but it's not infallible. Your experience gives you insight, but not omniscience. And if you want to live in a way that's both wise and just, you have to learn to carry your opinions lightly, to let them evolve as your understanding deepens. That doesn't make you indecisive. It makes you honest about the complexity of reality. In the end, being slow to judge isn't just about kindness to others. It's about protecting yourself from arrogance, from the false confidence that your view is the view. It's just about living in the awareness that people are more than what you see and more than what you think you know. If you can remember that, you just judge less, you'll understand more. And that understanding is where respect begins. One of the hardest truths to accept about life is that people will judge you no matter what you do. You can live in the most careful, calculated way, walking on eggshells, crafting every word, adjusting every move to avoid offense, and still someone will find a reason to criticize. This isn't T because you're inherently wrong or flawed, it's S because judgment is a constant feature of human interaction. People judge because it's easy. It takes no real effort to form an opinion about someone, but understanding why this happens and learning how to respond to it can free you from the exhausting trap of trying to live up to everyone else's expectations. Judgment often says more about the person making it than about the person receiving it. When someone criticizes you, it's not always a pure reflection of your worth or character. It can be a projection of their own insecurities, fears, or unfulfilled desires. A person who constantly belittles others is often trying to elevate themselves in their own mind. A person who mocks your dreams might simply be revealing their own fear of failure. And yet, if you're not careful, you'll absorb their judgment as truth carrying it like a weight that was never yours to bear. The danger is that repeated exposure to other people's opinions can distort your sense of self. You start to measure your identity not by who you actually are, but by how you re-perceived. You begin to craft a version of yourself that's palatable to others, trimming away the parts that might provoke criticism. But here's the irony: no matter how much you compromise, no matter how much you conform, someone will still find fault. Because the problem is always you. It's just the fact that people see you through their own lens, and that lens is never perfectly clear. This is why self-knowledge is so critical. If you know who you are, if you've done the work of understanding your values, your principles, and your goals, you're far less likely to be shaken by passing opinions. You can hear criticism without automatically internalizing it because you have a stable point of reference within yourself. That doesn't mean you ignore all feedback. It means you evaluate it. You ask, is there truth in this? Does it align with my principles, or is this simply someone else's projection? If it is the former, you grow from it. If it is the latter, you let it go. But achieving that level of self-assurance isn't easy because it requires the courage to stand alone when necessary. Most people would rather blend in because standing apart invites scrutiny. And scrutiny can be uncomfortable. It makes you feel exposed. Yet the reality is, if you want to live authentically, you have to accept that you'll be misunderstood at times. You'll be judged unfairly, and sometimes you'll even be judged for doing exactly the right thing. Think of historical figures who changed the course of society. Many of them were despised, mocked, or dismissed in their own time. It was only years later that their contributions were recognized for what they were. If they had caved to public opinion, if they had reshaped themselves to fit the mold of acceptance, their work would never have existed. That should tell you something. Public opinion is not an infallible guide to truth. Sometimes it's the exact opposite. That's not to say you should close yourself off entirely from what others think. Healthy criticism can sharpen you, challenge your blind spots, and help you grow. But there's a difference between using feedback to refine yourself and allowing judgment to redefine you. The key is discernment, knowing which voices to heed and which to ignore. And often, the voices you should listen to are the ones that both respect you and challenge you in equal measure. At the same time, you need to ask yourself an important question. How much of your energy is spent trying to manage other people's perceptions? If your life is a constant performance, with every action calculated to win approval or avoid criticism, then you not truly living, you re-auditioning. And the tragedy of living in perpetual audition mode is that you never get to fully inhabit your own role. You become a series of masks, switching them depending on the audience, until you forget what your real face looks like. Breaking free from that requires a shift in focus. Instead of obsessing over how you are perceived, invest that energy into becoming someone you can respect. The aim is not to be untouchable to criticism, but to live in such alignment with your values that criticism, whether fair or unfair, doesn't derail you. That's when judgment loses its grip, not because it stops happening, but because it stops defining you. You want to win everyone's approval. You shouldn't even want to. Approval is fickle, and often it comes at the cost of authenticity. But respect, both for yourself and from others, comes from consistency, integrity, and courage. If you can hold to your principles when it's unpopular, if you can stand firm in your convictions even when people talk behind your back, then you've built something far more valuable than a spotless reputation. You built character, and character is what will carry you when the noise of other people's opinions grows loud. It will keep you steady when they misunderstand you. It will remind you that your worth is not up for public vote. That is the kind of freedom most people never experience, not because it's impossible, but because it's uncomfortable. It requires you to stop seeking validation and start seeking truth. So when you find yourself on the receiving end of someone's judgment, pause before you react. Ask yourself, is this a reflection of me or a reflection of them? Is this something that aligns with who I truly am, or is it simply the echo of their own insecurities? And most importantly, am I willing to sacrifice my authenticity just to escape their disapproval? Because at the end of the day, the goal isn't to live in a way that pleases everyone. It says to live in a way that when you look in the mirror, you can honestly say, this is me. And if you can do that, the judgments of others will lose the power to control you, because you will have already judged yourself and found the verdict worth living by